Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's AAHOA Awareness as part of our Hotel Owners Academy. Considering the recent tragedies in Dallas with the murder of a hotel owner and the recent event in Utah with the death of Charlie Kirk, a conservative leader and activist, AAHOA is hosting this virtual learning session to provide you and your teams with support and actionable guidance during this very challenging time. Our chairman, Kamalesh KP Patel, says in a statement, "Our hearts are absolutely broken for the victim's family who witnessed this unimaginable act of violence. Hotels are not just workplaces for our members and their teams, they are homes, businesses, and community spaces. The brutality of this crime is beyond comprehension, and our thoughts and prayers are with the loved ones, the property owners, and the staff who are all grieving this senseless loss."
A statement from AAHOA President and CEO Laura Lee Blake. This is one of the most horrific crimes we have seen impact a hotel workplace in recent memory. Our hotelier community is devastated, and we stand united with our members and their teams during this incredibly painful time. No one should ever face such violence while simply doing their job.
Kamalesh KP Patel continues, "We are committed to advocating for enhanced security measures and the implementation of comprehensive safety protocols to protect members of our community. We encourage AAHOA members and industry to reach out for support or resources you may need during this time. AAHOA is dedicated to creating a platform where concerns can be raised and solutions collaboratively developed. Let us use this moment to reinforce our commitment to each other's safety and well-being, continuing to foster a professional environment that preserves and upholds the integrity and resilience of our industry." We commend Laura Lee and KP for those statements. And again, we welcome you with our hearts open for AAHOA awareness, healing, and prevention. Support your team and strengthening your hotel safety. My name is Sean Tibbetts. I'm the Senior Director of Education here at AAHOA. Michael Schwartz, our Senior Coordinator of Membership Development and Education, is traveling today to an HOC in the Mid-Atlantic. Today's agenda is to talk to you about ways that you can provide team care and support. These approaches are meant to help you and your team process trauma, access counseling resources, and feel more secure at work. We're going to provide some proven steps and examples, and we have an expert with us today who's going to help you to strengthen the safety measures and perform due diligence at your hotel to help reduce the risk of crime. Joining me today are Pooja Mehta of DPA Attorneys at Law and Todd Seiders, the Director of Risk Management at Petra Risk Solutions. Good afternoon to you both.
Good morning. Hi.
We'll start our conversation talking about the importance of team care and support. But before we do that, I do want to give Pooja and Todd just a moment to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. You may have seen me on some other webinars, but my name is Pooja Mehta. I am the Managing Partner of DPA Attorneys at Law, but today I'm more so here as the committee chair of the Education Committee. And we wanted to bring this special session to you guys as an emergency virtual learning experience to support and give back to our community in this very difficult time. And before we start, I'll let Todd introduce himself as well, but I would like to do a moment of silence for those who we've lost.
Hi, everybody. I'm Todd Seiders, Director of Risk Management and Loss Control, Petra Risk Solutions. We are an insurance broker that only insures hotels. We insure about 4,000 hotels across all 50 states. I'm a retired police officer of 25 years in the Anaheim Resort, where I dealt with nothing but tourist and hotel and amusement park issues. And I've been with Petra now 25 years, managing loss control, crime, safety, OSHA, rules and regulations, anything that's going to cause you an insurance claim or a lawsuit or any type of a problem at your hotel. And we've seen it all, done it all, and I'm here to help you manage some of this stuff. So thanks for inviting me.
We're glad to have you, Todd. As Pooja said, let's give a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone. As we get started, as I said, we're going to start our conversation to talk to you about team care and support. One thing that you do want to consider when an event like this happens, whether it's at your property or elsewhere in our industry, is the immediate response and emotional first aid that you can provide your team and your staff members. And be mindful that in the Dallas incident, as an example, it was an incident of an employee who actually committed this terrible act. So be mindful that while this can happen with guests, it is also something that you need to be mindful of with associates. So at your hotel, when dealing with trauma, some of the things that we were able to capture were acknowledging the event with compassion and transparency and avoid minimizing the circumstances. You want to be able to provide safe space for your staff to talk, share their feelings, or even to sit quietly if that's what they prefer. Encourage taking time off where needed and avoid stigma or penalty for any of those actions. And where possible, bring a counselor, chaplain, or trauma specialist in for immediate debriefs. Pooja, I'll turn to you. What are some thoughts you have in regards to providing team care and the immediate response that hoteliers can think about to be able to provide this space for their associates?
So as we all know, when we have staff involved in such an incident, it can be extremely traumatic for them. And so it's very important that not only are we taking care of ourselves and what's occurring as far as cleaning up the incident per se, but also taking the time to sit with staff members and try and get them to release any thoughts, feelings, fears that they have and address those. And the resources that are available that you can provide to staff for them to speak and to communicate with those who can help them through these difficult times. Many of you should have workers' comp insurance, and so through that insurance, there are hotlines that your employees should be able to call and speak to someone live about any concerns or issues they are facing. So that's what I would add.
Excellent. Todd, any thoughts on this before we move on to our next slide?
No, just what Pooja said. You do have workers' comp insurance. It does provide counselors and trauma specialists to employees that have gone through a criminal activity, robbery, anything else that they need some time off or they need some counseling. It is included in your work comp insurance, and it is, you just submit a claim like you would if they had slipped and fell. And you'll get an adjuster and they'll assign somebody and it'll be handled just like you would if you had cut your hand or broken your arm or something. So make sure you use those resources.
And absolutely. So they were speaking about counseling resources and things like your employee assistance programs. This will help you with those counseling resources to be able to provide that time. And again, just having these conversations can really start to de-stress the environment. These are hotlines that can help that in regards to crisis or trauma that occurs on property. And in some cases, these events that have been happening throughout the country, whether it was the terrible act in Mississippi last year or Oklahoma City, or the events that just took place in Utah, or the couple of events here recently that have happened in Dallas. By providing your team the care and support after this happens, you can also mitigate the possibility of things like this occurring next time, or be more prepared when they do. By providing digital and marketing resources in multiple languages for accessibility, this can also help ease that stress where sometimes English may not be the first language. Normalize seeking professional help and framing it as a part of the resilience in your hotel. Pooja, any additional thoughts here?
Yes, I would also like to add that aside from these, one-off events, there's also more frequent events that do occur at hotels and motels where maybe a housekeeper walks in on a guest who has a medical issue, or a medical issue occurs maybe at the front desk or somewhere else on the property that may not be heightened to the level of death, but some other medical condition or even perhaps a suicide. And in those events, that's also when your mindfulness should kick in to reach out to these employees, sit down with them, ideally on an individual basis, if your team is small enough, and really get to the bottom of if there is any, underlying trauma or effects that have, mentally affected them or emotionally that you can help address.
And I'll pick up on that just for a moment, Pooja. In my years of operations, the first time that I actually, besides a family member at a funeral, the first time I saw a dead body was actually in a hotel guest room when I was training housekeepers. And it's normally not the manager or the assistant manager or the owner operator who's finding that person who may have passed natural causes or had a medical issue. Or sadly, in many cases, people do go to hotels where they commit the act of suicide. And I've seen that in both areas, and it's troubling for anyone. I consider myself to be pretty even keel when it comes to trauma response, but even in those moments, I found myself really beside myself and not able to cope with it the way I thought I would. Todd, any additional thoughts you have on those type of things that could be occurring at a hotel outside of just the trauma of a crime?
No, you're going to have the homeless issues and the crime, but you're absolutely right. The national average for finding a deceased person in a hotel room is about twice a year per hotel. Now, obviously, if you haven't had one, that meant somebody down the street might have had three or four, and it's not an unusual occurrence, but it is for the employee who does come across the. So it's a discussion you should have with employees and have some sort of a response in place or a discussion on how to respond if it does happen.
So I did have a question that came into the chat, and I'll go ahead and read that. And again, our Q&A box is at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, or it could be at the top, depending on which platform you're using. For hotel owners that live on site in gun-friendly states or open carry states, is it smart for owners to learn gun safety and start carrying or conceal carry? Todd, I'll turn that over to you as a law enforcement expert.
Well, I'm very pro Second Amendment and gun, having been a police officer for 25 years, obviously. And you are running a business if you're comfortable with a handgun and you properly train and you follow all the laws of your state and get licensed and whatever. It's a tool. It's a tool like a hammer. If you're comfortable with it, it's something that you can deal with. I I don't see a downside as long as you are training and following the laws. It's also good to be familiar with handguns because you will have a guest who leaves one behind occasionally, and you're going to have to handle it, put it into a safe condition, and store it for that guest to return. I don't usually recommend you turn it all over to the police because it could simply be an off-duty policeman who forgot his gun. That happens quite a bit, believe it or not. And you want to wait and talk to the guest, and if the guest is suspicious, then you call the police. But if it's an off-duty or military person that did that, but it's private property. You get to defend your private property. You get to carry on private property as you see fit. It's just make sure you're trained and properly licensed and all of that stuff. That's my advice.
And follow all state and local laws as well as federal laws, of
Yeah.
course. As we turn the page on leadership's role, it's important that leaders take time to speak up and understand that you also likely need space for the emotional consequences of the actions that are occurring in the industry, including a trauma response. So the more you listen and the more you speak up, sharing your emotions with staff members can help them to also move on. Again, avoid rushing people to move on. Healing is not linear. It's not a line level path. It doesn't mean that just because you've coped with it and dealt with it doesn't mean the other people on your team have. And don't make jokes. This is not a time to make humor. While levity can be a great tool in many cases, this would not be an example of one of those. Ensure managers receive guidance on their trauma response as well so that your supervisors are well informed. And lead with humanity first. Your business second. Yes, your business is important and it's what's helping you prosper, but be mindful and remind staff that they are the most important asset on property. I know for years I worked for management companies and worked as a line level associate all the way up to GM. And I had many leaders throughout my career say, listen, if somebody comes in to rob the till, give them the till. If they want that laptop, give them that laptop. Again, their safety should come first, and make sure your associates are aware of that. Pooja, additional thoughts?
I think you about covered it. I think the stressor here on this slide is that be aware that every employee, every member involved in the incident is going to deal with the incident in a different way. They're going to cope in a different way. And so one strategy you might use with one employee may work for that employee, but maybe not necessarily the next. So utilize the resources that you have to give the support that they need.
Absolutely. Todd, any additional thoughts here?
You know, I gotta say that the vast majority of employees at hospitality are the nicest, kindest people, and they come to hospitality to work because they're service oriented and they want to please people. And these are the people that do not handle confrontation or trauma in a good way. These are the great. I love working with the hotel industry. The owners, the employees, everybody is just so service oriented and wants to make everybody happy that it's just a joy to be in that environment. But then it's also you get people that aren't conscious of how bad things could occur. And, a hotel is just like a mini city. You have crime, you could have fire, you could have weather emergency, and now you're placed in the middle of a traumatic experience that you really didn't sign up for. You could have a hurricane, you could have, fire, you could have a guest that's lost their mind. So it is important that you talk with your employees and be prepared for that because they didn't sign up for it, and they're great people.
I couldn't have said that better. As we turn the page, I do want to talk with both Pooja and Todd about hiring practices. Todd, I'll start with you this time. I see that you shared a great list with us. Would you like to review some of this and your thoughts in regards to these hiring practices and how they might help prevent something from occurring at one of our members' property as we look to the future?
Absolutely. We can't choose our guests, unfortunately. So it's a potpourri for the guests when they walk in, but we do have a chance to choose our employees. And what we've seen post COVID, there's a lot of people that weren't in the workforce prior to COVID because they may had some emotional issues or personality issues, and they've come into the workforce because a lot of people who were in hospitality prior to COVID found other employment because hotels were closed and travel ceased. And so they moved on. So we ended up hiring people that maybe weren't our first choice. And so there's a lot of things available to you to ensure you're getting the best possible person when you're hiring. And I would just remind you to, start with the employment application. Application's always important. It's a tool that you can use also if you need to terminate an employee. If they lie on their application at any time, you can bring it up and use it for termination down the road if you need to. But look for time gaps. If they've got a 1 year gap between employments, let's ask why, what happened, and let's write that down and vet that a little bit. If they said they went to school or they were caring for a sick adult family member or something like that, but let's ask about it and find out. I think we all agree that if you have an employee apply, he's worked at 3 jobs in 3 years, that is a huge red flag. And we should be asking those questions. Sometimes it's legit. Maybe they picked jobs that they weren't comfortable with, but a lot of times it could mean that they just don't get along well. And it costs you nothing to call previous employers. It costs you nothing. Call and verify dates of employment, and then you can ask 50 questions. Now, the employer can decide whether they want to answer them or not, but you can still ask the question, and if they won't answer, they won't. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to get somebody who will give you a hint or some additional information that will help you decide on whether you want to hire. Run criminal background checks if you can. The internet now is fully mature. It wasn't 10 years ago. It is now. There's a huge number of companies available. You can get a $25 background check all the way up to a $250 background check. And it can be done within 24, 48 hours. It's cheap. It helps. it does give you a snapshot of that person. And I think Pooja would agree that if you do have an employee issue where it involves a guest, it's tough to sit in a deposition and be asked, why didn't you spend $25 to do a background check before this employee assaulted my client? And that's a tough one to get out of and say that you didn't do it because you didn't think of it or you couldn't afford it, especially if you're looking at a big lawsuit for something that happened to a guest. So a simple background check really does help. We do have E-Verify. It's free. Again, if you want to look, we have ICE doing raids or arrests. I don't want to call them raids as much. If ICE does show up at your hotel, they're going to be looking for a specific person. They're going to have a warrant. They're going to have a deportation order. They're not going to show up and run through the back of house and check everybody's immigration status. They just do not have the manpower to do that. But they may show up and say, hey, this engineer that's worked for you for 10 years, 5 years ago had a felony arrest that you may not have known about. And so E-Verify is a great tool to help you make a hiring decision. If the person gives you a social security number that doesn't belong to them, that's something that you can find out very quickly. And again, if you're ever in a court and you're asked, why didn't you just simply call E-Verify to verify on this employee's social security number and status? It's hard for you to say, well, I didn't have the time or I couldn't do it. And I always say, trust your gut. Every single one of you, especially owner operators, you've interviewed hundreds of employees. You've hired hundreds of employees in your past. You can feel when something isn't right, doesn't sound right, somebody's off a little bit. Trust your gut, and don't hire the first guy because you're desperate for somebody. Take 48 hours. If you like the guy, take 48 hours, make some phone calls, check E-Verify, maybe run a background check, and at least you can go to sleep at night when that person's on the desk and feel a little bit comfortable that you did everything you could to vet that employee to make sure that everything's in good hands.
Pooja, I'll turn to you. Any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, like Todd mentioned, everybody should be having an application that applicants, employees fill out. And that application will be very important so that you learn about previous employers. In certain states, you can ask about criminal history. And everyone needs to have that as part of their hiring process. So what I'm going to do is, if you don't have a written application, I am happy to send you one for free. I will have Sean post my email, and it's pmeta@dpalaw.com. And if you don't have one, I can provide it. I can even provide this E-Verify link for you guys. Use these free tools to try and vet these employees before hiring. It's extremely important, and without going into too much detail, the employee that was involved in the incident in Dallas was an employee, right? And did have a criminal background. And so this is why this slide is in place right now, because we want to emphasize the importance of doing your due diligence before you hire and bring on employees. Because you're not only bringing this employee onto your property, but you're also having them work with other team members, and they're also, interacting with guests, and that can cause a further issue. So just be really careful with your employment practices.
As we turn the page about Petra Risk Solutions, and we want to thank Todd for being here, there are 3 additional follow-up questions already in our Q&A box. They're all related to self-defense. So I'll pose them all, but as individual questions, but I think the overall answer will come as the same. The first question was, how about, instead of a gun, keeping a taser gun to defend? Followed up by, back to the earlier question about carrying a gun, what are some good resources hoteliers can utilize to learn about their state and local laws? And then lastly, in the same vein, if we don't keep a gun on premises, what are other self-defense techniques that can be useful? And within our region, with regards to self-defense intervention, could we house even an event? I think that all kind of loops back to the state and local law first, but Todd, I'll turn it to you for the rest.
Yeah, no, great questions. I would say tasers, yes, but tasers require two darts to penetrate the skin of the person you're shooting them at. If they're wearing heavy clothing, they will not penetrate in some cases. Or if the person pulls one of the darts out, it will not complete the electrical loop, so they won't work. But I have an answer for you, and that's pepper spray, OC pepper spray. That stuff is nasty as hell. I'm telling you, I'd rather get shot than get an eye full of pepper spray. The OC pepper, it's a 10% solution. You can buy it anywhere, including Target and Walmart. And I would tell you to go buy 10 bottles of it and put it all around your property. You have somebody that wants to fight or that's belligerent, and you just give them a good shot in the face of that stuff, and it completely incapacitates them. And you want to make sure you get the gel, not the spray, but the gel. It's thicker. It doesn't have an overspray effect. It hits pretty much what you're pointing at, and you can make adjustments. And then it's a very thick, foamy stuff that doesn't infect other people around. But I can't encourage it. I carry it in my truck. I carry it when I'm walking my dog, because if you just get that weird guy that approaches you and you feel threatened, it's a great tool, and your employees can use it. If they feel threatened, and it doesn't kill anybody and it doesn't permanently damage anybody. There's also a non-lethal pistol that's called Byrna, B-Y-R-N-A, B-Y-R-N-A. It's a non-lethal pistol that shoots projectiles or pepper balls. It hurts. It'll certainly stop an attack. It's legal in all 50 states. And it looks imposing. So there are a lot of non-lethal options. I recommend that maybe you get a couple of them and try them out. If you need help with guns or self-defense type courses, check with your local sheriff's department, your local police department. Start there. Their community services bureaus have often, they'll actually have handgun training that's free at the ranges at the police departments or the sheriff's departments, or they will refer you to a local gun store or somebody in the area that provides that. So start with them, and they have resources for you on that.
Thank you, Todd. Pooja, any thoughts?
No, I think I would have to defer to Todd on that and what's
I
best.
agree.
But I do agree that from a legal aspect, at least, try to use the non-lethal options, just to, again, avoid liability. I think another point is, what do we give staff members, if anything, to help? Do we? I mean, obviously, in this case, the employee was the issue.
Right.
So, does it make sense to give them self-defense, alternatives as well, or do we just kind of keep it to managers and hotel owners?
Yeah,
That's
that's a
a
tough
great
question.
question. Yeah. I mean, that's something you'd have to determine, property by property, and some properties you may not have strong managers that would be willing to intervene if there was a confrontation or a physical confrontation. So that would be a case by case basis. But there are options. It's a great time now to start talking to staff and management and ownership and say, what do you think? And come up with a policy or something that works for you. The California Hotel Lodging Association has a pepper spray policy that I wrote for them and some training material. Check with your local hotel lodging association too, your state or city. They may actually have partake in that realm also, but we're recognizing it in California, and all the major metro areas have problems, all of them. So it's a good time to talk about it.
Really appreciate those insights, both Pooja and Todd. Again, if you can go with a non-lethal option, you always want to follow local, state, and federal guidelines and make sure that the proper training is in place, as Todd and Pooja stated. As we turn the page, thinking about their business as a business, Todd, frankly, their business and their hotel is private property. So while in the incident in Dallas, in this one example that we were talking about, it was an employee, What about the rules that are in place for private property, even if it is an employee or if it were a guest?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's something, we usually talk about guests, but all of this applies to employees also. You are private property, and it is a violation of trespassing if you refuse to leave when you're asked by an owner or the agent for the owner to leave the property. And that includes employees. Sometimes you will have a belligerent employee that you have called in to discipline, or you're going to put them on administrative leave, and they decide to push back and say they're not going to leave, and they don't have to leave, and they go back to work when you don't want them to go back to work. Just understand you are the agent for the owner, if not the owner. It is private property. You get to decide who stays there and who goes. And that includes guests. And then guests do have to follow house rules. Every hotel has house rules: no smoking, no pets. You got to wear a bathing suit when you're swimming. You can't cook in the rooms, things like that. Those are all house rules, and those are up to you, the management or ownership, and the guest has to abide by those. If you catch somebody smoking or cooking in a room, you have the right to knock on the door and tell them to knock it off. And if they tell you no, they're going to do whatever they want, then I would recommend you ask them to leave, because smoking damages your room. Cooking, your electrical systems in hotel rooms are not built to support hot plates, irons, and hair dryers all at the same time. That'll blow a circuit and throw a breaker switch, because they're just not designed to withdraw that many amps. So that's why you get to manage that stuff. And remember, anybody that's homeless, you got local kids on skateboards, people try to jump your fence and go swimming, neighborhood kids. All of that is under your control if it's private property. If it's your business dollars that are maintaining the parking lots and the sidewalks and those things, then it's private property, and you get to decide what people do and where they go and where they stand, and they can't be there without your approval. And it does cancel all other arguments. It's kind of your ace in the hole. You, instead of having to argue with somebody who tells you they're a lawyer and that they know what they can do and can't do, and you can say, well, gee, if you're a lawyer, then you understand the premise of private property and trespassing. It's really the most basic premise of the Constitution, with home ownership and search and seizure rights and things like that. And as long as it's private property, you decide what they do on it, and you manage it. So
I'll turn to an actual attorney here with us today. Pooja, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what I'll add to that is that when introducing that rule, I think we need to be very careful, right? I think we're seeing more and more that guests, employees don't have an issue now with getting into altercations, right? And we saw that with the Oklahoma incident. And so we just need to be very careful with how we're communicating and at what point are we going to walk away from the situation, right? We don't want to put ourselves in a position where now us as the manager or the owner is now putting ourselves in a safety risk by trying to implement your house rules. Another great step for house rules is to post those house rules on your registration card or some other document that you get the guests to sign at check-in, so it's very clear to them what those rules are in advance. And so that conversation doesn't necessarily happen later when they're already breaking that rule. So I would just say proceed with caution when trying to execute your rules.
yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, you shouldn't put yourself in a situation where you can't back up what you're claiming. Like, if you don't leave now, then I'm going to push you out the door. Well, absolutely not. You're going to say, hey, we're asking you to leave. If you're not going to leave, we are going to call the police. And if they won't leave, you walk away and go call the police and wait for the police to respond. 90% of the time, if you say, okay, I'm done with you, I'm going to go call the police, the person leaves within the next couple of minutes because they don't want to deal with the cops. And you and I do know that sometimes the police don't respond. We get that. but you still threaten it. You still go and call the police, and you might get lucky and have them respond quickly, but 90% of the time, just by you walking away, claiming you are going to call the police, that person is not going to stand there and wait for the police to show up. They just don't. Human nature is going to make them flee. They will probably leave. So.
And Todd, on that note, I've already segued to the next slide about getting to know local law enforcement and the police or sheriff's office in your town or in your county. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, folks, let me tell you, the cops are the easiest ones to buy. And by buy, I mean you give them free coffee at 2 a.m. in the morning and you give them a clean bathroom that they can use. You're going to have the police showing up at your place, hanging out, which is not a bad thing. And when you call for assistance, they're going to be there really quickly because they don't want to screw up that bathroom that they get to use privately and have it available 24 hours. And you do have that. And you have night audit there, and you have coffee generally. And it's a great thing to, if you see a cop driving through your parking lot, grab a soda and chips out of your market and run out there and give it to them and make them take it and tell them they're welcome to come in anytime and use the bathroom, or if they want to use the phone, or you've got a business center, if they want to use a computer, we'd love to have you and, come join us. It just makes them feel good. Right now, everybody hates cops, and it's very unusual to have somebody come up and say, hey, we appreciate it. And here, come use our facility if you need it. Also, you can call a supervisor. If you're starting to have crime in the area, call the local beat supervisor. There's a sergeant that's in charge of your area. Offer to buy them lunch, sit them down, tell them what your concerns are, get his email address, maybe even his cell phone number, and he will, hopefully be available if you need somebody. Rather than having to go through the dispatch center, you might be able to call him directly and he can get somebody to get out there a lot sooner and faster. So it is a plus. Go back to the previous slide there. Perfect. Some police departments do offer crime prevention inspections. They'll actually come out and walk your property and tell you where to cut your hedges so we can see the front desk better, and lighting and things like that. Again, it gets you more contacts at the police department that you can call if you have problems. And one of my Jedi mind tricks, I call it, is to put a sign at one of your parking spaces up front that says police vehicles only. It's a rouge, but crooks do drive through your parking lot before they decide whether or not they're going to rob the place or try to steal something. And if they see that sign, they may think, oh my goodness, the police must frequent this. They have their own parking spot. So maybe this isn't a good hotel to come and caper at. So it's just like I said, it's a rouge, and it's not a bad thing. I think guests wouldn't look at it negatively either. I think they'd be positive when they looked at it and said, oh, the police do come out here and visit or come by. So it's good to know that we're going to be safe. So
yeah, I'll add something to
ahead.
that. Putting my hotel operator hat on, back when I was owning and operating hotels, there was a bit of a stigma with having police officers in your parking lot or at your hotel. We didn't want that, because that to us meant that something is clearly going wrong at this hotel, and guests, as they drive by the hotel, or prospective guests, are going to say, I don't really want to stay at that property. There's clearly some, negative things or crime going on there that we don't want to stay at this hotel. But I will say that although that may still be the case, I think that the pros of engaging law enforcement and having a relationship with law enforcement far outweigh, maybe losing a little bit of business here and there, right? And that's just in our minds. We don't necessarily know whether that really deterred guests or not. Be conscious of that. I think having a relationship with your local police officers is very, very valuable, especially in today's climate.
I wanted to say also in the chat, somebody mentioned, thank you, Todd. I used 602 correctly. Very helpful. I got results without altercations using local authority, it works very safely.
Perfect.
And then
602 is the criminal code in California for trespassing.
we
I've
do
seen
have a
those.
question that came into the question and answer box with sensitivity. Of course, it says there's a lot of negative rhetoric about immigration today, and particularly Indians or Indian Americans. Is there a list of safe practices or any advice that you could give to try to deter, de-escalate, or avoid threatening situations? And I'll turn to both of you for that. We can start with Todd.
Well, I would say that nationally, with all the experience I've had, I have not had a lot of hate towards the Indian culture, Indian Americans. It just doesn't, I just can't recall even a time where it's, it's come up.
I think that it may be that we both are from California, and so we don't necessarily feel it as much.
That
I
could
have,
be. No, you're right. Yeah, you're
yeah.
right.
I have conversations with a lot of folks across the country, and the way that Indian Americans are treated are different state to state. And a lot of times I hear from folks in other states, and I'm appalled and I'm just in shock at some of the things that Indian Americans have to go through. And maybe that's more in, the southern Midwest states, it seems, from my conversations. And so, unfortunately, I can't really speak to it either. But I think that when it comes to altercations, regardless of your race, I think that we need to be really conscious of, again, not putting ourselves in a position where we are putting our life at risk, right? No amount of money, no guest, no employee is worth our life. And when it comes to an altercation, I think that the safest thing that you could do is invite that guest or employee to potentially come to the front desk office or somewhere where there's a barrier between you and that person, and you can still have a conversation without being in reaching distance of each other, right?
Absolutely.
I think we need to be aware of where we position ourselves with respect to third parties now. Unfortunately, this is something we just have to be more mindful about now. Gone are the days where we could just get into an argument with someone and they'll leave, right? Now, physical altercations are occurring more and more. And we are seeing that even at our specific hotels. So let's be mindful. Let's teach our employees and staff best practices as well, that no altercation with guest or employee is worth it, and instead put yourself in a position of safety.
Agreed.
Pooja's absolutely right. We have to, even though culturally you may argue very aggressively with another Indian man or another black person or whatever your racial cultural setup is, but it doesn't work with everybody, and you need to be able to recognize that and withdraw from a conversation as if it starts to heat up, and culturally understand that not everybody spars that way, and that it can be interpreted by them as something overly aggressive, which may cause them to become overly aggressive also. So that's true. Every culture has a little bit of different way of handling arguments and confrontations, and we have to be aware of it.
It's certainly challenging from time to time, and we don't want to see those cultural differences become heated and it become escalated, to both of your points. So, sensitivity, being mindful of the circumstances that are occurring. And Todd made a really great point earlier that I'm gonna say again. Hospitality professionals are designed to be hospitable. So it's in our nature in hospitality to be kind and provide good service. But Pooja, you made a good point as well. Today, it feels like sometimes these arguments escalate at a faster pace than they did at one point. And sadly, at the end of these outcomes, sometimes it becomes a crisis, or what we're talking about today. And that could be a guest, it could be an employee, it could be a loved one, it could be anything along those lines that are happening at hotels and businesses throughout the country. So be mindful. If you can de-escalate, and utilize some of these proven practices that Todd and Pooja are sharing with us. Todd, and when it comes to calling the police, you have quite a few items here. Let's focus in on not downplaying the circumstances, right? When a hotel owner, operator, or staff member acting as an agent of that hotel is going to call the police, they need to make sure they're doing it effectively, right?
Correct. And you know what? You're calling because it's your last resort. So we need to convey that. You've probably already given multiple warnings and tried to solve the issue, and it just hasn't worked. And we're calling the police now. You want to make sure the police understand that you have made multiple attempts to solve the problem. They're your last resort, and you need to talk to the police department that way. Don't apologize. Don't downplay. Say, hey, we have a situation. We need help now. We need somebody to respond immediately. Here are the circumstances. We've given multiple warnings. We need somebody out here right now. And you want to make sure you convey that because police departments have fewer resources now and they don't have a lot of officers. So you have to be screened, and that screening person is going to be very stingy with their police response. And we need to convey that, hey, we need help and this is why we need help. And you want to use appropriate terms. We got trespassers causing a disturbance and they're refusing to leave and they're causing damage, or they're interfering with our business, or they're threatening guests. If a guest asks you to fight or step outside to fight, or that they may have a weapon, man, that is a ticket to a much faster response by the police. So you want to make sure that you convey that they are threatening physical violence or violence against other people, and we need some assistance right away. And then if you are up on the floors, you don't want to call down on a radio and have your front desk call the police, because he can't answer the 50 questions he's going to get. And I would prefer you to call directly from the incident, step away, get out of danger, and then call directly yourself so you can answer the 50 questions and maybe get a better response that way. And remember, you're on a recorded line, so be very direct and specific, because that clerk now has to classify your call as either a priority 1, 2, or 3 call, and we want them to be the call to be as high a priority as we can get it. And that the way you do that is being direct and specific. And now you puts that clerk in a pickle that they know it's a recorded line, and if they don't send you the help you need based on the information they have, they could get in trouble. So let's make sure we use that to our advantage.
Pooja, any additional thoughts here? I think Todd did a great job covering.
Yeah, I agree. There's a quote at the bottom of this slide. I think everyone in this webinar needs to take a picture of it. I don't think you can be any more direct and clear with this statement. And that is going to get the police to do something. I think any other statement may cause confusion, may cause delay in the police showing up, and is not going to communicate that you need help immediately. Please, take a picture of this and print it out, post it at your front desk so that you can refer back to it when you really do need help.
Excellent. I'll leave that on the screen for just a moment. So Todd, it is unfortunate, but we do have to talk a little bit about violence. I think you can provide some real clear insight here.
Yeah, well, like we said earlier, culturally, there could be factors that cause people to go violent sooner. So those need to be considered. The country is divided, and it's almost 50-50. And we saw with the responses of the Charlie Kirk death, some people thought was glad he was dead. No, who's ever glad of that? And then other people were sad, and it's just gotten to be kind of crazy, and social media has a lot to do with that. But there is an increase in violence. I can say that across all 50 states after working at Petra for 25 years. We were talking earlier before the webinar about how COVID kind of brought the crazy out of normal people, and PTSD, like Sean said. I agree with that. It's a great statement that it's kind of a PTSD, and people are confused quicker, and they're not processing their thoughts well, and they tend to throw verbal bombs and threats, and it just escalates so much faster than it used to. So it's something we got to be familiar with. There are 400 million guns supposedly in the United States, when we've only got 330 million citizens. So the gun violence is never going to go away. It's something that we got to live with, but we just have to be prepared for it. And like Pooja's been saying, the minute something starts to escalate that seems unreasonable, it's time to back out, get a barrier between you and the person, and call for assistance from police, or at least get some other employees to show up to help you de-escalate the situation. So guns are everywhere. There's not much you can do. I get this call all the time with, "Hey, Todd, can we prevent people from bringing guns into the hotel?" And the answer is yes, but they're still going to bring them in and you won't see them. They'll be in their bags and they'll sneak them upstairs. And so you can have a policy against it, but it's not going to prevent it. So it's better to de-escalate, talk to your staff about confrontations, unreasonable guests, get away from unreasonable guests. Let's get somebody that has a little more experience or expertise, or call the police. If that's what's appropriate.
Pooja, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. I just think you just never know now what weapons people have. Sure, you might be able to avoid people having guns, but what if they have a knife, right?
Sure.
There's nothing you can do about that. So protect yourself and, maybe carry one of those alternatives like the pepper spray if something does occur. But I think nowadays if you find yourself raising your voice or yelling at someone, it's time to walk away from that conversation,
Right.
because it's just going to escalate that much more. And at the point that you're yelling at someone, you're not going to even get any conversation, completed anyway.
Right.
I think use that now as a trigger for all staff and for yourself, is that when you find yourself elevating your voice, that should be a hint in your mind that it's time to walk away.
Pooja, I'll add to that. I'll say this. If you find yourself being the person who does have a tendency to have an elevated voice, and I'm guilty of this, I have a lot of bass in my voice. So sometimes when I'm just talking at my natural tone, people have said, "Why are you yelling?"
Mhm.
And it's interesting, right? Because that's not my intent ever. But if I am, and I found myself as an early manager getting frustrated with a guest, and then the bass in my voice did become elevated more so. And I had to say to myself, what am I representing to the rest of the guests at this hotel? And what am I showing the employees that are watching me do this? So your behaviors, meaning us as industry professionals, your staff members are watching that. So if you have a tendency to get elevated and your natural reaction is to have an argument, be mindful of what you're doing in front of your employees. Find that balance of how do you see something, say something, and then are you making sure that when you're acting out these behaviors, you're not putting yourself into harm's way or your employees. Todd, there's another slide here of signs to be aware of. We talked a little bit about that throughout the flow of today's session, but I do want to give you an opportunity to really set the tone for some of these.
Yeah, I want to say that, after 25 years of being a policeman, I've become a student of body movement and behavior. And I urge all of you to watch people and watch their behavior. When people don't act normally in that situation, those are things you should be picking up on. And that's, like all of the things that are on here, fidgeting and standing around and looking around. And body language will tell you a lot. If you're talking to somebody and they turn to the side when they start talking to you and they clench their fists as they're standing there, those are all things you should be picking up on, because that's not how a normal person who's having a conversation would talk. These are all things to look for. Sometimes it's hard to see it when you're in the heat of a discussion, but be a student of physical behavior and how people walk and talk and how they stand still and if they're bored, and just pay attention to people. It does give you a lot of insight. One thing I do want to point out, and this is true in all 50 states, every homeless person has a stabbing instrument. Every single one. They either have a knife, an ice pick, a screwdriver, a machete. And if they aren't showing it, it's in their pocket, it's on their person, because that's how they protect themselves in the street. And you need to tell employees that, look, if you're going to physically maybe try to grab a homeless guy and pull him out the door, I guarantee you he has a stabbing instrument of some sort, and you need to be very careful.
Thanks, Todd. Pooja, any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would like to say as well that, you know your hotel's best. And so if you need to have security personnel of your own on site because your hotel is in a location where crime is more prevalent, then that's something that you should consider. I know that a couple of clients of mine have a rotating security guard who goes between the hotels in their area and is doing loops. And they all share in the cost of that patrol company. And so then at any given time, if you don't feel like you can count on the police officers to show up when you call, then you can at least maybe count on this private security to offer that additional support in the event things start to go wrong. So I think that's a huge measure that you guys can take and have somebody on call in addition to the police that will advocate for you.
Excellent. Todd, any additional thoughts on your end? And we're going to open the floor back up to questions as well.
Yeah, no, and a great advice by Pooja. I've seen this, the Disney Resort area. There was a gentleman who was an ex-retired policeman. He started his own patrol service and he got everybody on Harbor Boulevard to buy in, and he just patrolled all night, overnight, made a ton of money, and he was somebody you could call. The only difference, if you are going to have your own security force, insurance-wise, they cannot be armed. They can have pepper spray, but they can't be armed with handguns. Your insurance does not cover that. It's an exclusion, a specific exclusion. So, make sure that you check with your insurance broker or your insurance carrier if you're going to add a security team that has handcuffs and weapons. Get advice from them first. But I can tell you across the board, no hotel insurance covers armed security. You would either have to add to that policy or get an additional policy for that. And we don't recommend it. We recommend pepper spray or something of that nature.
I want to thank Todd Seiders and Pooja Mehta. We appreciate Pooja and Todd's time today.
And I'd love to be a resource to y'all. Go ahead and send me questions, anything OSHA safety, anything that has to do with insurance claims or issues. I'd be more than happy to network with you and give you the best advice I can.
Thanks, Todd. We appreciate that. It does look like a question is coming in. Let's see what we got here.
There's a comment about a glass partition. I think one thing that came of COVID was having those partitions in place.
Very true.
A lot of businesses still have those in place, just as continuing preventative measure for COVID. So, I think the weirdness is kind of away now, and people are more used to seeing those and don't necessarily look at it as some kind of violence protection, and instead it's a COVID measure. So, I think that having some kind of partition in place is a good step of safety as well.
Thanks, Pooja. The other question that came into the chat is regarding security cameras. I have camera system, but they're not monitored. How to protect them? So I think the question is, if I have an unmonitored camera system, I don't know if they're saying that it is actually recording either. Now, I've seen both sides of that equation, both Todd and Pooja, where cameras are throughout the property. They've got the grid of TVs up near the front desk, but it's not actually being recorded. Or in some instances, I've seen where maybe 2 or 3 of those cameras are out. Maybe that's what this question was alluding to, but I'll turn to Todd and Pooja and see if they have thoughts about those camera systems. Todd?
Yeah, I was going to say, I love cameras. The more, the better. Record them. Get the highest clarity that you can. They help protect you in claims and in incidents. It also helps prevent your staff from doing bad things, because remember, everything in your building, they can use it their house. So there's a lot of internal theft, or could be, depending on where you're at and what you have. The best way is just to have a signage somewhere that simply states, cameras are being recorded, or cameras may or may not be monitored at any given time, something of that nature. You can make it playful if you want to. There's no legal language that's required, but if you can post it in a couple of different areas that they're not being monitored, however you want to say that, it's beneficial, because there's lots of lawsuits about people getting attacked under a camera and they didn't resist because they felt they were going to be rescued right away. And so all those cases are very factual driven, so the facts have to be, and they usually are. The facts are pretty bad for the hotel or for the business. But I love cameras. The more the better, and just put up some simple signage, and maybe Pooja can add to that legally.
And Pooja,
Yeah.
there was a follow-up, I think, on the barriers. This could have been as for something else, but somebody said the brand is removing these as a standard. I think they're referring to the COVID barriers. But I would ask, I guess I would ask you as a follow-up, is there some sort of process inside of a waiver or something along those lines if the hotel determined, perhaps?
Yeah, I think if the hotel determines that they want to have that partition in place and the franchisor is saying, no, it's not part of our brand standards, that you could definitely go and try and get a waiver from your franchise rep. And for them to tell you no, seems
Yeah.
like a little
Yeah.
bit of an issue on their end if they don't want to protect you and you feel like it's necessary for your protection. So I think that's something you could fight back on. And if you need your help with that, I'm happy to talk to franchisors on your behalf on that. But I think also with respect to the signage, if you are recording audio and visual in the front desk, or any location where employees are, in California, for sure, you need to have signage so that employees are aware that their voice and visuals are being recorded. So there does need to be signage for that. Signage, I think, also just helps in deterring people from acting out because they know they're being recorded. I think a lot of times I do see cameras that are not recording, and I think that all hotels now need to have at least a 30-day recording of their cameras. And those DVRs don't cost that much money, right? Reach out to whoever installed your cameras if you don't know how to. But it's a really nominal cost for extra protection. And 30 days isn't going to be a lot to help defend you in a lawsuit because you're probably not going to find out about one in 30 days. But, if an incident were to occur, you're usually going to find out within that 30-day period. So 30 days seems to be the minimum that I would recommend for recording your cameras.
That makes sense. There's a follow-up in the chat as related, I think, again, to the removing of the barriers. It says that the brands, I don't want to navigate this without saying it. It says one of the things the brands have done recently have failed to advocate for eliminating these and the prominent spaces at the front desk. He's stating he has an older property, so they're moving to these modular front desk designs where there's not even really a full desk there. It's almost like a circle, and you can kind of reach, right, or a partition, like barely a partition, so to speak. And I've seen that in my travels as well. I would go back to Pooja and Todd on this. My opinion would be if you're in a high risk environment and you think that this is something that would provide safety, I would go back to what Pooja said earlier. If this is something you think you want to fight for, then you might want to look at a waiver and that option. Pooja, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I think we spoke about a lot of options and alternatives to put yourself in a position of safety, right? Whether that's, now giving front desk clerks pepper spray or what have you, if a partition is not an option, or having security personnel that comes in and out of that front desk, or having signage to deter crime, right? So, you kind of just have to do what's best for you on a case-by-case basis, but yes, again, if you feel like that partition is necessary and franchisors, are not allowing you to do that, then that's a conversation that, we can have separately.
Yeah, and I was going to say, anytime you preference it that it's a safety issue, safety, safety, safety,
Right.
it's going to be very hard for that franchise to say, well, no, we don't want you to be unsafe. So, I mean, it's all how you frame it. And if you go in there saying, well, it's my property, I'm going to do what I want. Okay, now you're going to have a fight. But if you go in and say, oh, my staff doesn't feel safe without it, they're concerned about the new COVID variant, and, it just makes them feel safer, and it's a safety, safety, safety. You usually can sell that, and it's hard for anybody to say no.
Well, Todd, Pooja, thank you so much for providing this amazing content. I'm very confident that another session like this, sadly, will be necessary, but providing these tools, resources, and insights into our industry and to the things that have been happening. Our thoughts and prayers go out to all the victims of these heinous crimes, and we want to be here for you, and AAHOA stands firm side by side with you in making sure that we do address these issues in a timely manner. So we appreciate you being with us today. Again, thank you to Todd Seiders and to Pooja Mehta. Pooja, as the team liaison for the Education Committee, I was very proud of our committee over the weekend. We got together late last week, and over the weekend we're corresponding. Todd, your willingness to come and adjust your schedule to participate this just shows how important these issues are, and we truly appreciate both your time today.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.